You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast, Beast Over Burden, your favorite podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Sims. I'm the CXO at Barbell Logic, a strength and nutrition coach. With me is Andrew Jackson. He's our COO and also a strength and nutrition coach. Hey, Andrew.
High energy introduction.
Woo!
I don't even know what to say anymore, but.
Yeah, that's okay. We're just glad you're listening, Andrew. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks.
It's awesome.
Glad to be back.
I feel really grateful that we get to do this and talk to people in this way.
It is fun.
So thank you for listening.
I was thinking like the other day, even if nobody was listening, would I still want to do this? And I think so. I mean,
yay.
I think they're good conversations. That was our mission when we started, right? Like we have these conversations all the time.
Yep.
Let's just do that and record it. And so
yep,
I think we'd be having these conversations one way or another.
We would talk about this stuff because it fills our days. And whenever I'm put on the spot to have to talk about something, it makes me learn about it a bit more or learn how to talk about it. So I think it's really helpful for my own kind of development. So thank you for bearing with me while I do all of that.
As a wise man once said, totes my goats.
I thought you were going to do the Heinlein quote. So something that I think is cool that happened, I think it was this week or late last week, is you benched 300 and how many pounds?
I don't remember, 55?
355 pounds.
Or 60. It was just shy of 365.
Okay.
Because I didn't have the full 25s on.
Oh, okay. Here's the clincher. It was at a 24-hour fitness, which if you have ever gone to a 24-hour fitness, you know that that type of weight does not get benched there very often, and nor does that entire full range of motion. And I don't want to fully blame it on the lifters there because they are not set up for success with those benches. They're horrendous. Those are horrendous to bench on.
Or the bars, or the lack of chalk.
They're super short. You can't get any leg drive. They're slimy. The barbells are terrible. Racking and unracking is just a dangerous moment all in itself. And you managed to rep that weight out. And I think there were a lot of nods of respect in that gym.
Yeah. It's like anytime you start putting more than 315 on the bar, you get the sort of like the nod and grunt kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I got a couple that day.
With that amazing bench press, I thought it would be neat to talk about why that was so neat. And the bench press, I think, is really reliant on equipment, which I think would be really neat to kind of nerd out on why there's so much variability in that bench press that you were on at 24-hour fitness, and then why it's so nice to have a good bench press set at home. And then we can nerd out about, our favorite cues and technique stuff.
Yeah. Bench, I've talked about it before, that bench went from 0 to hero for me. I used to not really care about the bench as popular as it was. It just never really got me interested or excited until I started working with coaches who were really into the bench. It was infectious because, anytime you talk to somebody or work with somebody who's super into anything, you just kind of feed off of that. And so working with coaches like Matt Reynolds and Jordan Stanton, who are extremely detail-oriented people and really good benchers, I finally came around to really learning to enjoy it. And unsurprisingly, my numbers also shot up. I was never really had much of a bench until I worked with Matt in particular.
You were a presser. You were like, press is the best lift ever. Must prioritize press.
Yeah.
Bench is silly.
Especially power clean and press, I thought was pretty neat.
Oh, yeah.
And I still do, actually.
Like the hipster lifts.
Totally hipster. Weightlifter, yeah. It's such a funny funny mental image. But yeah, I was into the hipster press.
You could have had a man bun. You would have had a man bun.
Man, yeah, those days are probably over, unfortunately. But anyways, yeah, so I'm actually enjoying bench significantly more than press. In fact, I talked about it earlier this year that on our year in review podcast that press has kind of fallen by the wayside entirely. So
yeah.
it's become like the PBR, of beers, where it was all the rage for me in the 2010 to 2020 era. And now it's just, out of fashion.
Yeah.
But long-winded answer there is that I think the reason that there are things that are influenced more so than some of the other lifts is because there are actually a lot of technical intricacies of the bench, and the muscles involved that are usually the limit of your ability to bench are relatively small. So you have to be pretty technically on point through also a non-vertical range of motion, or non-vertical bar path, I should say.
Yeah.
Which adds some other kind of unique complexities where it's the only lift where we are intentionally adding a horizontal component to the movement. There may be some artifacts of horizontal movement in the squat, deadlift, or press, but it's the only one where we're actually creating momentum that's in the horizontal direction intentionally. And I think that adds a little bit to it. And then you just have your wrists, like along with that horizontal movement, you have your wrists in the equation and your elbows and your shoulders. So it's the three least stable joints of the body lifting almost, depending on how strong you are, it's like not that far off. For me, it's not that far off of what I'm squatting in many cases.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, the press has all those variables too, but I'm lifting literally over 100 pounds less than I'm benching.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think that's really what all the different kind of elements. Plus, on top of all of that, it's the only lift you're laying on your back.
Right.
So you have this whole other surface that you're kind of having to deal with rather than just staying balanced, which is why you can lift so much more.
Yeah.
But it also adds kind of another variable that, like when you're lifting at 24-hour fitness, comes into play.
Right. If you think of the bench press as like the squat of the upper body, your scapula really need to act as the feet. And if your scapula aren't frozen and supported by the rest of your musculature of your upper back and your arch, then it'd be like squatting with your feet kind of moving. And that makes it really tricky.
The analogy I think of it more is as if, if you go that direction, it's like, I should know the name of the squat, but it's like the squat where you put the bar on your feet.
The squat where you put the bar on your feet.
There's a squat variation where you lay down on your back and then you put the bar across your feet.
So like a barbell leg press?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that would be the closest analogy.
Right.
Yeah. Although I would argue that the femurs are more set and secure than the scapula are. The scapula like a free floating.
Yeah. Like I said, the shoulder is definitely one of the most unstable joints. But yeah, I think of that, the benches, arm squats, where we joke about that all the time.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, you're trying to, instead of your feet having this big flat floor to push against, you're trying to hold on to this bar in your wobbly wrists.
Wobbly hands. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That are sweaty sometimes.
That are sweaty. And like there was essentially zero knurling on the 24-hour fitness bars, which we can talk about that component of it too. Yeah, a lot of moving pieces and a lot of variables that are external to your body. And, again, similar to the press, the deadlift and the squat, the bar is pretty immobile. You're on the squat, the bar is pretty much glued to your back unless you're making, a technical error that's allowing it to roll up or down your back. And the deadlift, you're trying to pin it against your legs, essentially. So you have these points that reinforce stability, whereas with the press and the deadlift, it's floating all over the place. But again, with the bench, you're 100 pounds heavier. So when you start thinking about all those different pieces, it gets to be quite a technical challenge to execute really well.
So what do you think some of the best things are to consider for equipment for the bench press to help support what your body's trying to do?
I think a goal to aim for all of the equipment moves you towards is to have a set of equipment that minimizes as many of those variables that we were just talking about as possible. So you want a setup where getting into the start position, because this is another challenge that's somewhat unique to the bench to the others, is that the squat does have a walkout and the press has a little bit of a walkout, but again, the bar's glued to your back, so you're more stable. Whereas the bench, you're having to unrack the bar and get it out over your shoulders. So right out of the gate, just getting into the start position of the bench has a variable that can be significantly different depending on what equipment you have, particularly whether you've got a bench or a squat rack, or what kind of J hooks you have, or whether it's the fixed,
how close the spacing is in your J hooks.
Oh yeah, like all of those things are things that are going to change how stable you can start. And right out of the gate, that's a huge variable that will dictate how much tension you can establish as your start point when you lower the bar. All of the different pieces, the bench, the rack, spacing, or the friction of the bench on your back, whether you're using J hooks, the monoliths,
the height of the bench,
all of those things, I think good pieces of equipment for those are going to minimize and or essentially eliminate the amount of movement that you need to get the bar into the setup position, both horizontally and then also vertically.
Yeah.
Because you ideally only have to just barely lock your elbows out to unrack the bar and get it over the lip of the J hook. If you're having to like shrug the bar out, which I did for many years because I had a J cup with a huge lip. I was benching out of a squat rack that had a big lip out of it. Unsurprisingly, I had gnarly shoulder pain for a long time.
No wonder you didn't like benching.
Yeah, exactly. That was a big part of it because I didn't like getting heavy, because then I was having to like shrug it 4 inches out of this giant J cup. So you lose a ton of stability, you lose a ton of tension. You're having to use a bunch of energy just to get it up over the J cup and into position. So good equipment will, in my ideal home gym situation, I have a very sticky bench with very small spacing to be able to adjust the height and monoliths so that I basically have zero horizontal movement to get out over my shoulders. And all I'm doing is just barely punching or locking my triceps out so that I can get just the smallest amount of movement to free up the monoliths and enable me to start lifting, which is the exact opposite of the 24-hour setup.
Yes. It's terrible height. It's very far away from you. The bench is very narrow and slippery.
Spacing is huge.
And I think you're right underneath a light. So you're staring into this super bright light.
Yeah. And while warming up, the gym bros come over to tell you, hey, I'm just about the same work weight. You mind if I work in with you, bro? And then we can take turns spotting each other, who then proceeds to do half reps with 100 pounds less than what I'm doing.
Well, I was there when this just happened to you and I was doing my thing and I looked over at you benching and then I saw you were benching with someone and I was like, well, that's not anything that Andrew would instigate. So I wonder what happened. And he looked like he was muscular. I was like, maybe this is working out well. And I saw like the weights that he had on. I think he was trying to do like 275 or something. And then I saw him actually do things with the barbell. And it was an unrack, and then his butt would immediately lift like 5 inches off of the bench.
Yeah.
He would do some quarter rep, maybe a half rep, which you still had to help him with.
Yes, he was going to failure every set.
And then he would rack it and then fist pump you.
Yeah.
Like he was proud.
Yeah.
And he did that for multiple sets. He didn't change the weight. He just kept doing that.
Doing it.
And I saw you just with so many eye rolls. Andrew doesn't have a great poker face sometimes, and there was not a poker face.
Yeah, I've been told I have also just resting, pissed off face, and I wasn't even holding back on that. Like I wasn't even trying to be cordial. I was like intentionally trying to, I just wasn't hiding the fact that I was annoyed that this guy was intentionally going to failure every single set, expecting me to pull the damn weight off. And he wasn't even doing full reps, which, to the credit of most gym bros, I think they know to do at least touch the bar to your chest He's probably one of the first, if only, people I've ever seen do half reps on the freaking bench. Come on.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah, pretty bad. Pretty bad.
Anyways,
Pretty bad.
it was brutal.
It was fun for me to watch, though. I enjoyed it.
So good equipment minimizes all of that. And
it makes you super stable, like that you can put your feet in a spot that allows you to create leg drive, which is important for people who are on the shorter leg side, is you might end up on a bench that's too tall for you and you can't get your full foot pressing into the floor. And that's when it's important to put something underneath your feet so you can actually get some good leg drive. That's not slippery, like something really grippy.
Set the ego aside. I think a lot of people, particularly guys, I've noticed, don't like to do that. It feels like training wheels or something, but it's not your fault. It's that the bench is too high. We need to get you a different bench, get it lower to the ground. If you have short shanks, if your tibia and fibia are relatively short, it's going to suck unless you either put something under your feet. I can't tell you how many people they're just like, they're in pain, they feel unstable, they can't figure out how to get the arch, but you get the feet up a little bit higher, or effectively you lower the bench. Or opposite, some people, other way around, bench is too low, get it up higher. And it just completely changes your setup.
Big time. Yeah. And if you have to go bench at some standard gym like a Globo gym, I definitely recommend one of those A7 shirts that are grippy. And I've also seen people use that like bubbly shelf liner that's really grippy. You just keep like a square of that in your gym bag, and then you can put it between you and the bench, and that would do better at keeping you stuck. Or wear a tank top or just a sports bra if you're a lady, which you can also just take your shirt off, kind of, if you're a guy, like I also just saw you do.
Yeah, that was actually a new one. I was fed up, and it was heavy enough that I was like, well, this is going to happen. So I just pulled my shirt up my back, let my belly hang out, and let my sweaty back just fuse with the bench. It was just hot, sweaty skin melting into the plastic.
On that bench? Yeah.
I made sure to wipe it down.
On that bench specifically, there was a period of time where the cushion on that bench press, it sounded like someone put like a squeaky toy in it. And
Oof.
so like whenever you would put your head down, there'd be like a, or like when a dog has a squeaky toy. And it was so funny. I ended up being on that bench one day and I could not avoid making the sound. And I just went with it because it was hilarious.
Yeah.
But I really thought that someone was just in the corner laughing at everybody who was doing it. People did it before me. People did it after me. And it really did sound like a burp or burp.
We should probably put some sort of medical disclaimer in, so that we don't get sued because of a ringworm outbreak across the country as all of our listeners start barebacking their benches.
Well, yeah, wiping the bench down and showering is pretty important. Oh, boy. Well, as much as you can take care of equipment, what are some tricks that you like to utilize for getting into a really good setup to, you want to just like have the hard work isolated in the rep and in the weight, not the hard work, distracting you by trying to keep your form together and holding your position. So like, what are some things in the setup and execution that you think are really useful?
Well, I think like you said, and I mentioned earlier, eliminating all of the setup variables or all the positional variables from the lift before you unrack it. Take advantage of the fact that you have this heavy weight that you can use to smash yourself down into the bench.
Totally.
And drive your legs against. Sometimes I'll reach up and put my hands against the rack so that you can kind of help pin yourself down and push your butt as close to your shoulders as possible and get a big arch set. But then before I even take it out of the bar, I make sure to take a big breath, brace, add some tension from the legs. And then as I'm unracking, as I'm like, even just before I unrack it, applying pressure to the bar with my hands, I'm using that weight to drive myself further into the bench. So also a good bench has a little bit of squish, not a ton, but enough that you can kind of almost feel like you're wedging yourself between the bar.
You like to feel the surface area of the bench wrap, or like yourself wrap and like fuse into more surface area of the bench.
Right. Just a little bit more of a grip kind of a situation there.
Yeah, that concept you just talked about using the weight of the bar, to me that felt like getting the slack out of the bar in a deadlift. And so I would always want to like get the slack out of it on my bench, is like use all that weight to push against. And even if you're not benching more than your body weight, it's still a weight in your hands that you can like, like 90% get it off the pins and use it to just like push yourself down, get heavy in your feet, get heavy in your upper back.
Right.
And then when you do it, much like a deadlift, when you get the slack out, it kind of just like floats off. And then that's how you know you're like maximum readiness.
In contrast to what you often see with new lifters is a ton of wiggling around after the unrack. They try to take the barbell out of the rack and then get set. So maybe you can pull that off with a 45-pound bar, but I do not want anything to do with that if I'm, benching 365 for reps or something. I want to take it out with a minimal amount of movement and be able to go straight into the lift. So I don't want to be trying to take my breath.
Yeah.
I don't want to be adjusting my grip. I don't want to be trying to set my shoulder blades. I don't want to be wiggling my butt around. I don't want to be shifting my feet around.
Right.
It's totally locked in.
Frozen.
Completely frozen. And I would add the detail of squeezing the bar as hard as I possibly can.
That's one of my favorite sneaky cues.
Yeah, which is one that I've really emphasized even just within the last year. I've made more of a point of that. And it's really interesting because I notice it change not just my interaction with the bar, but all the way to how my shoulders feel. There's just like a different amount of tension that goes all the way up the arm when you squeeze the bar with everything you've got.
Yeah. And I'll bring that one back to the deadlift because it's the best lift. But, when you're deadlifting and it gets heavy and you lose your grip on the bar, often I can tell that someone's grip is going because their upper back rounds, because the rest of their body is not getting the memo that they have heavy shit in their hands.
Yep.
And so when you're benching and you squeeze, the rest of your body kind of is like, okay, all right, we are being called upon to move this heavy weight around. So yeah, like squeezing it just is like a great signal to get everything ready to work really hard and keep your wrist straight.
Yeah, exactly. That's another big one, is that it secondarily will it won't completely straighten it out, but it'll put it into an optimal position.
Yeah.
But I had to work on that a lot because I had a tendency to like flutter my grip.
Yeah.
Sometimes in between reps. And it has made the bench a lot more consistent, which is another thing that I think is important about this aspect of the bench. Similar to others, but I think even more so with the bench, is that variation in that setup and in those positions over the course of a set will make a huge impact in your ability to get reps 4 and 5. I don't know how many.
It really adds up. Like it compounds at the end.
Yeah, I don't know how many sets of 5 I missed the 5th rep and I was just too cocky on the first 3.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, this is easy. I wasted energy or a little bit of strength on those errors early in the set. And a true heavy set of 5, you have such a small margin for error.
Yeah. And that means like when it's the beginning of a set of 5, you might feel cocky enough to do 2 reps on the same breath with the trade-off of getting a little bit out of position on that second rep. But that might work for some people, but you might need to actually take a breath between each rep to make sure you're tightened up and you're not losing position throughout the set.
Interesting.
That's where I see it. Yeah. If you can get away with not breathing, great. But breathing is also a risk too, because if you take too big of a breath, then you're going to like lose the arch that you've created. Your shoulder position is going to change. Your ribs are going to come down a little bit. So I always think that, exchange just enough air to survive and then keep going.
Reynolds was actually the coach who gave me the get 2 to 3 rep per your first breath. Like that was back in 2011.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not going to be sloppy about it, yeah. But if you are going to be sloppy about it, then no.
Ever since then, I've always tried to get at least 2 or 3 because I've personally found you can never get as tight as you were for the first breath because of all those things we were talking about, like being able to, get that first breath set.
Yep.
Sometimes you can't avoid it, but I always try to, because I've just like, no matter what, no matter how careful I am with 350 or 400 pounds in my hands, I can't get that arch back.
Yeah. There's always some leakage, some power leakage.
Yep.
Yeah. Squeezing the bar, and that helps you feel like the tension in your forearms. I always like to imagine how my forearms are moving vertically through space, Even if the bar has a horizontal component, my forearms are staying pretty vertical. I imagine that. I also imagine that my pecs are a big rubber band that's getting stretched on the way down, and they need to be stretched with control, not like a quick, loose stretch. Like I want it to be a really tight, eccentric, and then I can push back up into it really well.
Yeah, I think you have one of the most stable forearm and humerus movements that I've ever seen with somebody bench. They're just like completely locked in. There's no wiggle. There's no inefficiency that I can perceive. It's just like you are perfectly locked in. Everything is, just minimized. All movement except the exact movement of the bar path is eliminated.
Yes. Yep, that was always my goal. And like feeling my upper back really heavy in the bench. If you've ever done a rep and it just feels like, oh no, it's just, this is all deltoids. I don't like this at all. Versus other reps where it's like, okay, I got a good amount of pec here. I know my triceps are going to kick in right when I need them. I'm able to put my leg drive into this rep versus some reps where it's just like shoulder blades have come up a little bit, lost some arch.
Oh, yeah,
and
it's brutal.
It just feels so bad.
Yeah. I think that one's really important, which is another thing. I guess it's not dissimilar. It's not unique compared to the other lifts, but the trade-off from the pecs to the triceps and the delts for the lockout is such a big transition. It's why the sticking point for almost everybody is about 3-4 inches off your chest.
Yeah.
During that transition point. And I think that's another thing that is really important is, you don't want to bounce aggressively off your chest, but you do want to accelerate into that transition point with as much speed as you can, because you're transferring from a pretty big muscle mass to two, for most people, not so big sets of muscle mass.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're doing that in a way where you're, not compromising the technique. One of the interesting failure modes that I've seen, it's interesting, is when you get into that sticking point, you notice people start to shrug.
Yep.
Because the body is like, I need to figure out how to get every possible amount of muscle mass.
How do I solve this problem?
To solve this problem. And then it's like, well, maybe the traps will work. Even though it does absolutely nothing to help you, you just can't help but get pulled out of position. And then you start doing this weird, like,
yeah. Keeping my shoulders away from my ears was something I was always working on. And I knew when I wouldn't because my shoulder would hurt. Great feedback loop.
Yeah. Lovely.
Well, that's a good one for bench press. That'll give you all something to work on. If you need any bench recommendations for your equipment, hit us up. We definitely have lists of things that we like. And hopefully you got some good bench tips out this so that we can all keep perpetuating the ultimate quest and question of how much you bench. It's an important pursuit. Thanks for listening. We'd love a review if you want to leave us one. We'd love a share, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.